I'm Daniel Kelly, as Sherry said. I'm the Associate Director for the Center for Technology and Society. And my awesome colleague Lauren is here as well, who is our National Policy Council for Civil Rights. I think where I like to start is kind of like at the very beginning of all of this. I think we hear, certainly at ADL, we talk a lot about hate and harassment in digital spaces, whether that's social media or online games. But I like to start with throwing it back a little further to sort of the vision of the internet at the beginning of the internet, right? And so this is a quote from John Perry Barlow, who's one of the sort of original thinkers of sort of cyberspace, right? Digital spaces, and you can, I won't read the quote, you can read it yourself, but with the idea being that somehow in creating this new suite of digital spaces, we could create spaces that are more just, more humane, more respectful and inclusive of more people than our physical world. And I think it's a beautiful dream, and I think it's something that I look to inspire the work that we do. But as I think the reason why we're all here, to some extent, is that this ended up very much not being the case, right? I think it's something that we want to work towards and aspire to. But I'll point here to some of the statistics that we have. So ADL has done a series of surveys of hate and harassment in social media spaces. And this points to, I think, to some extent, I'm sure you've seen in the news, but this sort of looks at overall, looking across all social media platforms, what are people's experience? So this year, 44% of Americans reported experiencing harassment in social media, and 28% reported severe harassment. So this includes physical threats, sexual harassment, stalking, and sustained harassment. I think sometimes I think this is changing now, especially in light of COVID, with more and more people in digital spaces for longer periods of time. But in many people's understanding, the kind of harms that are experienced in online spaces are somehow seen as lesser than what one might experience in a physical space. And I think what these statistics point to is that these kinds of severe experiences happen to a large number of folks in these kind of digital spaces, and should be taken seriously by the platforms, by civil society, by law enforcement, and by government. I don't know if you have any thoughts there, Lauren, that you wanted to add before we moved on.
No, I mean, I think that's exactly right. And, I think the fact that we're seeing increases in certain areas that are identity-based, which I know you touched on and we can touch on even further, yeah. Reinforces its integral part of ADL's mission and ADL's work, and also reinforces that, regardless of the trends of overall harassment ebbing and flowing in some way, that if it's increasing related to identities and it's increasing where we work, where we worship, where we learn, then the problem persists. And so us paying attention to that, I think, is really important across the board. And I don't know if, other organizations are doing it as well, but it's incredibly important that we continue the work.
Absolutely. And just highlighting some of the statistics that you had mentioned, which was that, in many instances, we are seeing increases in especially identity-based harassment in social media over the course of the last year, especially as we can see from this chart, focusing on Muslim Americans, on Asian Americans, as well as many others. So it's worth flagging that this is a persistent problem, and one that that ADL will continue to work on and try to work with the platforms, work with law enforcement, work with government to find ways to both hold platforms and perpetrators accountable and support victims and targets of online harassment in social media. So one of the areas that I focus on is on online games. So a few things just to flag on, and so this is we'll go sort of deep here in looking at online games. ADL is really the only sort of traditional civil society organization that works on issues of hate and harassment specifically related to online games. And you can see from this chart, it's something that our advocacy is both with the game industry and with civil society to dedicate more resources and to put more focus on this space, because it's an increasingly important space. So as you can see from here, 214 million Americans, and this is statistics from the Entertainment Software Association, which is the sort of industry organization that the video game industry has. They're based in Washington, D.C. And that the majority of them, as you can see from the second chart here, are over the age of 18, right? So you've got certainly 21% of gamers nationally are under 18, but the rest of them are older than 18, predominantly between 18 and 54, but some older folks as well. So I think the other statistic that I generally cite around this is that the game industry as a whole, in terms of the amount of money it makes, is larger than the film and music industries combined. So in addition to its prevalence among players and among folks in the U.S., it is a huge and growing industry, and will only continue to grow as time goes on. During COVID-19, I think we've seen, as we've seen other digital spaces become more prevalent, we've seen video games and online games as digital social spaces become so as well. So if you're looking at the game Animal Crossing, which is a Nintendo game where people play cute avatars like the ones you can see in this picture, we're seeing that as it become, increasingly political space, right? We see in this picture a Black Lives Matter protests. PETA has organized protests. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has spent time connecting with her constituents through the game. And so one of the questions I tend to ask around at this point is, just as a framing question, so what is the policy of Animal Crossing around political disinformation? If someone posts the wrong day of the election, right, in Animal Crossing, how do they as a platform think about that? Online games are generally behind even social media on these issues, and so we see it as our role to advocate with the companies and in the public around these issues to make sure that key issues affecting our society are paid attention to and addressed in these games. And so one of the ways we do this is in the same way that we do oh, Lauren, did you want to say something?
Yeah, if you mind just going back for 1 second, Daniel, because I just wanted to highlight a really important point that you made, and maybe something for the folks listening to think about in your questions. But we talk about digital social spaces because we work on those issues all the time. But I think maybe even teasing that out just a little more, knowing that online games are, and then individuals are playing games, but they are making friends. They are having conversations, as you pointed out. They're even protesting. So I think sometimes we think of games as, well, I'm just playing the game. And we're doing so much more than that. So I wonder if you could just expound upon that a little bit more, because for my own self-identification.
Yeah, of course, no problem. I would say, I think for folks who don't play games, I think sometimes it does come as a surprise that, oh wait, they're not just playing a game, right? In games, there are typically primarily two modes of communication. So a player can type text into a chat box, right, to communicate with their fellow players, or in some cases they can speak on a microphone and actually communicate via voice in these games. There are also other forms of communication. Sometimes people can create user-generated content. So, for instance, the Black Lives Matter poster that you see in that picture was likely something that was generated by somebody using the mechanics of the game to create a poster on their island, right? So you can imagine, we've seen, for instance, in Fortnite, which is the game that you see on the right, has a similar kind of mechanism for creating content in the game. And we've seen, you see, very sort of fun buildings and things, but we've also seen folks who have created swastikas and other sort of hateful imagery using user-generated content tools in these kinds of environments. And so one of the, as we did with social media, we also looked at hate and harassment in online games. So this is a survey we did last year, which we will be repeating in the fall. Before we sort of did this in August of last year, there really wasn't any numbers that we could put to the whole of online games as social spaces. So we found that 74% of American adults, so this is a study, again, looking at adults, experience some form of harassment in online games, and 65% experienced severe harassment, which includes threats, harassment, stalking, and doxing, which is the exposing of people's personally identifiable information through one of the communication mechanisms that I mentioned, whether it could be through text chat, through voice, or even through user-generated content. And so we see in online games the same kinds of trends that we're seeing in social media. We see the targeting of people by identity. Here you can see the experiences that various people reported to us as through the survey. And here you can even see exposures to extremism and disinformation in online games. So 23% of American adults were exposed to white supremacist ideology in and through online games. This doesn't necessarily say that, your young people are being recruited to be white supremacists in online games, right? There are limits to what a survey can tell us. But it does mean, we asked people explicitly, have you heard discussions about people talking about the superiority of whites and the inferiority of non-whites, right? A home for the white race. Things that are explicitly white supremacist ideology and not arguable in terms of sort of their intent. And 23% of folks say that they were exposed to that, and that means, potentially it's recruiting, we don't know, but it may also be just the normalization of this kind of conversation in these spaces, which is also extremely alarming. And we see, in the same way, we see a higher than we would have expected amount of folks saying that they're seeing Holocaust denial or glorifications of ISIS or other kinds of disinformation and extremist rhetoric. And so in the time we have left, I do want to talk a little bit about, what you can do, right? Because this sounds really scary. And, I think it is concerning, certainly, that these are the trends in online game spaces. But there is a lot that is commendable about these spaces, which we'll get to at the end, in terms of, we actually did some measurements around positive social experiences. And so what I'll go through here are just some ways that you can educate yourself and educate the young people in your life about how to make their gaming experience safe and inclusive, and to learn a little bit about their sort of their play experience and how they're socializing through games in their lives. So the first thing I generally say to folks is, well, I mean, I think overall it's really it's important that you know what games the young people in your life are playing. and to educate yourself on the nature of those games and the rules around those games and the communities around those games, right? So you can start by looking at the rules of online game spaces and talking with young people about that. So in the survey that was passed out before this, there were two games that seemed to be most popular among the young people in the lives of folks attending, one of which was Minecraft and one of which was Roblox. So a lot of my examples here will come from those games and those game environments, just because it seems relevant to the folks here. So this is an example of Minecraft's community rules, right? And so, you know, I think you can have an interesting conversation with the young person in your life about these community rules, right? Like, for instance, the first rule: treat other community members with respect, which is core to everything we believe. When you express your opinions, please do so politely and respectfully. I think you can have an interesting conversation about with your young person in your life about what does respect mean, right? What does it mean to be polite in an online game space? Does that mean that you are being cordial with everyone, regardless of how they're expressing themselves, right? Or is there another, you know, does respect take on other meanings in game spaces when you're confronted with people who are perpetrating racist stereotypes or being sexist, right? I think you know, I think the community rules of online game spaces are a good place to talk to young people in your life about these kinds of principles and what they mean to you and to sort of your family and your community. Lauren, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I'd love to pop in. I think if we're really talking about educating ourselves regarding online games, something that, you know, you've taught me, Daniel, because I wasn't really as familiar with the gaming space before engaging in this really important work, is, you know, in talking to young people about what they're doing, these games are, you know, akin to after school programs. They're akin to, you know, even in school electives. They're akin to, you know, playing with friends on play dates or you know, group outings. And just as you would be really curious, you know, what are your friends talking about, you know, in drama class or in robotics club, or you know, and you know, how does that club work, or you know, what are you going to watch, you know, when you all go to the movies? I think, like, starting from a place of curiosity to be able to sort of learn the framework of the way that young people are spending a lot of their time is something that we're not talking about as people who engage with young people, as parents, as guardians, as, you know, cousins and friends and all the rest, enough. Because you know, if left untethered, these are really influential spaces, but they can be spaces either to garner really interesting conversations and curiosity and learning and growth, or not. And
Yeah.
worse than or not is, you know, sort of all the scarier statistics that Daniel said. But, you know, all of these places do have, not all of these games, but most or many have community rules and guidelines. But having a conversation about that without even starting with, what do you do in these in
Right.
games? What games do you like? Why? Who's playing them with you? I think being really curious and hearing from the young people in your life about how they interact with gaming can then allow you to go a step further and make sure that they both are interacting and also receiving respectful and, you know, productive and fun and joyous experiences.
Yeah, totally agree, Lauren. And I think that's something that that I'm sort of highlighting here in terms of how these two particular games are, you know, operate. We can send these links around afterwards, hopefully. But these are the community rules and community standards for Roblox and Minecraft specifically. And I think it's an interesting there's an interesting difference between these two games. So with Roblox, all of so both Roblox and Minecraft are games that are platforms where players and young people and people of many ages can use the sort of base environment to build, different experiences and different kinds of games or environments to play around in. But Roblox is sort of very centralized, right? So even though you can build a new space in Roblox, the governance of that space, right? The rules, how you report, all these kinds of things are centralized in sort of the main company. With Minecraft, when people create a server, right, a new instance of Minecraft, they also have the ability to shape the governance of those spaces and how they sort of run. What are the rules for those spaces? There are some sort of ground community standards that Minecraft has, but then on top of that, each community creates their own rules, right? And so you have things like I have here, the UN used Minecraft to look at youth participation in urban design and governance, right? There are all sorts of different sort of educational uses of Minecraft, but there are also like Grand Theft Minecraft, right? This is a picture of, right? Where you can look at the rules for various, they call themselves gangs in these spaces, right? That are the community rules have a lot more to do with what happens when you kill someone from a rival gang, and what happens when you don't turn in your fellows, right? That there's a different the values of different communities are able to be reflected in the rules. And so I think especially with Minecraft, it's important to chat with the young people in your life about the specific servers and specific spaces they're in. And there are some, and you may find that they're part of some really amazing communities, but you also may find that they're not. So it's just something that is really worth paying attention to and looking at. So another sort of category of content that I think it's worth folks consuming and really talking with the young people in their lives about are what are called sort of game streamers. Primarily, these folks exist on sites like Twitch, right? And so there are, and I can share a resource after this where we list a few people who are pro-social. There's certainly transgressive, right, folks who stream. But there are a good selection of folks who really go out of their way to. So when we're talking about streaming, we're talking about someone broadcasting a video of themselves, and as they are broadcasting the video themselves, they're also broadcasting themselves playing in a game, right? So you could ostensibly have a streamer who is video, live streaming themselves playing Minecraft or playing Roblox, and there are certainly numerous streamers who do that. And there are certain streamers on Twitch and other services who make a point of embodying pro-social and positive communities. And I think identifying those streamers and watching their content with the young people in your life, I think can be very valuable in terms of discussing, how they play, how the streamer plays, versus how the young person in your life plays, and what they can learn and what you can learn from how they're playing in that space, right? I think a lot of streamers who are part of this community are very aware of, what are they modeling in terms of what happens when they lose, right? What are they modeling in terms of how they're interacting and treating their teammates, right? And the one person who I generally highlight here, who I think does a really good job of this, is someone named Ferociously Steph, who is a trans game streamer who is just a delight. But in addition to that, is also does a really great job of laying out a really inclusive community that really is about helping people to sort of. I think she puts it really well in her bio. Feel a little less weird about being weird, right? So for a good sign for streamers who are pro-social is that they do spend the time to lay out the rules for their community and the goals for their community in their sort of about me or somewhere on their page. They sort of lay these out in a way that's really accessible and really explicit and friendly. And yeah, I think spending time watching these kinds of this kinds of content with young people in your life can be educational in terms of what's out there, but also educational in terms of how the young person in your life plays and how they might want to play. Lauren, did you want to chime in there? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that this is such a good point, Daniel. And I think, you know, for those of you who are familiar with influencers on more like mainstream or currently, you know, the social media channels that we often refer to in big tech, like Twitter and Instagram and all the rest, these influencers have just that, a lot of influence. I think in the gaming community, and Daniel, I'd love for you to chime in, correct me, or add on, a lot of popular streamers that of course have influence, but the ones that are pro-social, and I'll hone on that word just for a minute, you know, these are influencers in the gaming space who believe that games, who understand the power and influence of games, believe that they can be spaces for growth and modeling, and then use their communities to further that mission. And that's something I think pretty unique in the game space, even though, yes, there's a lot of issues that we have to deal with and approach. I'm not sure, you know, of course, influencers across social media do have that level of responsibility. But I think this is one where, you know, because gaming is so popular among all people, but among young people, to be able to have that modeling because it's such an influential target market is something that I think I would, you know, just say is really akin to those influencers that you see on social media or on YouTube, or those, you know, accounts that a lot of people follow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think part of the reason why I think it's so important to engage here is also that I think, unfortunately, a lot of the pro-social streamers are not as popular as some of the other more toxic or more transgressive streamers. And so the, you know, exposing the young people in your life to more positive models of what streaming and what playing can be can also be really valuable. I'd also say, you know, if things get, you know, if things get bad, I think in online spaces, I think it's also super important just that you talk to the young people in your life about how do they actually report online harassment in the games that they play, and what does that look like, and you know what and why that's important. I think you know, anyone that I talk to in the game industry will tell you that reporting is super important. It's how they understand the problems and the experiences their players are going through, and it's how they are able to both address the problem in the moment, but also track the issues their players are experiencing over time. And so I think, you know, here you can see the report button in Roblox specifically. So this is, you know, it sort of walks you through the different steps you need to take in order to report an abuse of the rules in an online gaming environment. I think another reason why talking about the rules is helpful is with your young people in your life is that generally game companies will want to understand, you know, which of their rules or how their community standards have been violated. So I think it's just in addition to it sort of builds on the conversation that you have with the young person in your life about the rules and standards of a particular environment. I'll sort of finish with some of the positive social metrics that we found in our survey. So as I said, you know, the reason that we do this work is not because games are terrible, right? Are not because you know, all societal ills are the fault of video games, but rather that online games are extremely powerful, positive social spaces for many people, right? you can see from the survey results of adults, right? Folks made friends, they helped other players, they discovered new interests, they felt community belonging and learned about interesting topics, right? They learned about themselves. They even found a partner in these spaces. So I think we do this work because we want to make sure that the kinds of scary experiences that we talked about at the top become a less common experience, and the kind of positive social experiences that folks are describing in these results are become the norm for all players across online games as digital social spaces. So I'll sort of end there and say thank you. And then if there are questions that have come in or things we want to chat about, I'm happy to continue the conversation here. So I got a question here to me. Any tips towards directing kids to positive influencers? So difficult getting teens to watch the ones that aren't insulting and then carry that into the games they play themselves. Yeah, I mean, I think certainly we can share with everyone the list of pro-social streamers that I flagged in earlier on, and you can take a look at some of the content there. I think, yeah, I think I'm not, I'm not sure exactly. I think you're saying how do we get a teenager to actually show interest? Rather, we can point them to a particular streamer, and I think I think it's an interesting question. Okay. I think it's an interesting question. I think it's probably if I had a really pat answer, I think that would solve a lot of problems, right? I think certainly exposure is part of it, right? Making sure that they're aware of it. Yeah, and I think, and Lauren, maybe you have a better idea than I do.
No, I mean, I think you're right. I think exposure is hugely important and we can provide those lists, but I think it does sort of go back to the questions around curiosity, just coming into a conversation with a young person saying, who are you watching? I think you should watch these people because ADL told me or because I found them myself. Any young person might feel skeptical of that because they're a teenager and they're going through life. But to be curious, really shifting into asking questions. What experiences do you have? Do you feel like you're a model in, do you like who you are in gaming spaces? Do you like who other people are and what they do? Do you think it represents who you are in the physical world or not? And I would say starting with those questions and sort of leading them to think more critically about who they're watching, who they're idolizing or getting excited about could be a really helpful first step. And then that's building trust and it's building a legitimate interest in what they're doing. And then I think going from there might be one tactic. I think Daniel put it best, like if we did have the clear answer, then we wouldn't be here. But right. I would say like staying hyper curious in a genuine and authentic way about how they're spending this time and what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And then having that list in your back pocket.
Sure. I think that's a really good point, Lauren. The next question that folks asked is, how would you introduce a kid for the first time to video gaming and at which age? So there are games for folks at all kinds of ages. There are games, and I think it depends on your own comfort with the kinds of games that they would be playing at different ages. So I think a really good place to start is an organization called Games for Change that does a really good job of curating games that have some sort of focus on social issues or environmental issues or that are generally positive experiences. And I think I would look there. They break them down by ages, and you can take a look at them and see, look at the descriptions of the games, look at some of the images, see if it's something you'd be comfortable and you think your kid would be interested in, and you can sort of take it from there. Another question here is, so someone asked, so Lauren, did you want to weigh in there a little bit as well?
I actually just wasn't, to be honest, I wasn't sure if Common Sense Media, if there are ratings for, I know that we often look to them for ratings for ages and, what does that blue check mark say? What context, if any, do we have? And so,
Sure.
To the extent that they have those for gaming.
Sure. So I think for Common Sense and for the other kinds of ratings, the ESRB ratings, which is the, you see on your kid's game T for Teen or, E for Everyone, all of those are typically about the content of the game as a piece of media, right? So it'll say, does this have drug references, or does this have, violence in it? And what kind of violence? Is it just cartoon, or is it actually blood? But it doesn't actually say anything about any of the online interactions that happen in games. And so, this is something that we're in talks with various folks, Common Sense and others, right, about the idea of, okay, what does it mean to create a rating system for online spaces, right? How do we rate them? What is good, right? Is it certain policies? Is it reporting practices? That kind of thing. So if you're looking to give guidance to the young person in your life about the nature of an online game space, unfortunately, those rating systems are not really helpful. So another question here was about the banning process and what happens once someone is banned in terms of reporting. If they are banned based on an anti-Semitic or racist incident, are they reported to ADL or law enforcement? So certainly there are times when, as we've expanded the public's understanding of us doing this work, we have seen more incidents in video games reported to us, whether they're anti-Semitic or other kinds of harassment or hate. We certainly, the first stop is really with the game platforms, right, to talk to them about flagging the content, asking them why they have or haven't taken a particular action. But there certainly are instances when incidents in game environments can and should be escalated to law enforcement. I don't know if Lauren, if you want to speak to some of that, but there certainly are, these kinds of serious incidents that are escalated to law enforcement. They can happen in any sort of digital space, and they definitely do happen in online game spaces.
Yeah, I think that's right. It happens, but not enough. And I think that the more we normalize reporting and getting information, both for the platforms and also for law enforcement, the better. The more data we have, the more visibility there is for these institutions to formalize their responses. So it does happen. I think it often doesn't happen soon enough. And oftentimes individuals don't have like the right evidence, so to speak. So I would just say, yes, but if somebody in your life is experiencing this, definitely, certainly do report, do keep information about what's going on, so that you can provide as much as possible to law enforcement. I think people are becoming more attuned to responses, but to be honest, victim target services, they're becoming more forefront, but they're not quite there yet.
So this is more of a comment thank you, Lauren. That's absolutely, yes. More of a comment than a question, but I think it's a really good flag. It's important to educate parents about the depth of this community. You mentioned game platforms and Twitch, but there are also things like Discord servers. When I play, I sometimes have the game and Twitch feeds and several Discords open at once. Parents need to know to monitor all these different platforms. So I think that's totally, absolutely true. Like, games exist as social spaces, but they also have a multitude of other spaces that are associated with those with those games, and the community norms that are set in the game often transfer to these different spaces, whether it's an affiliated Discord channel or a Twitch stream or some sort of forum related to the game. And so I think, I think I think, I would defer back to Lauren's point earlier, which is that I think the state of curiosity is super important, because I think it's probably unlikely that many parents want to or have the capacity to monitor every single social space that their young person is related to, every single game and every single social media platform that they're on. And so I think remaining curious and keeping open lines of communication with the young person in your life can help you understand and have conversations around these kinds of environments. And Lauren, go ahead.
Yeah, just one thing to add to that is I think that it's a really, really great comment that there are multiple platforms, streams, mechanisms to communicate in and around the gaming world, gaming environments, and there are many factions within that as well. And so, like, harnessing that curiosity, if it's going to look different for every player, what do they use? Having multiple tabs or streams or platforms open at once, what is that individual person relying on or doing? So you can sort of map in your head, okay, then what are the conversations we need to have in light of that?
And the next question here is, it's sort of related, which is, can you speak to how best to monitor social media games for your kids while also giving them space and independence? Wondering how to bring these up with our children. So I think, I would lean back on the state of curiosity, asking questions, but I would also say that, especially for spaces that have very young people in them, like Roblox has tools, and you can look through their parent section, that actually do allow for some degree of monitoring, especially because they're really, their environments are really for like 6 to 12-year-olds, right? And the internet is a scary place, right? And so I think they do a lot to protect young people in those spaces, but they also do provide parents with tools to engage and monitor a bit what their young people are doing.
One thing to add, I guess two pieces. One would be, paying attention to what tools kids are using. Is it, and this won't be fully helpful, but is it video? Is it audio? Is it only laptop? Do they need a different, console of some sort? That might be able to just like help you start to think about what you could or might want to consider inserting some sort of rule or guideline or family discussion about. And then additionally, I would say, every kid is different and every space is different, but I would think of it as akin to, a young person socializing with a new group of friends or joining a new club in the physical world after school activity or whatnot. Like, what are the types of questions you would ask? What are the types of rules that you would put into place ordinarily? And then see how those might apply to the game spaces. I think something that it seems amorphous and non-linear, and it's not linear, of course, but you can sort of break down, what exactly a young person is using, how often, and maybe develop some sort of, family-specific or household-specific guidelines in light of that.
Yeah, no, those are really good points. A sort of broad question, which is a little hard to answer, but we'll give it a shot. Has ADL ever helped stop anything bad from happening because an incident came and was reported to them? I would say yes. I think that's less in our wheelhouse, which tend to be more at the high level of policy with platforms. But certainly, our colleagues in the Center on Extremism are constantly sort of monitoring and tracking extremist activity in online spaces. and when appropriate, escalating those communications and potential threats to law enforcement so that they can act on intelligence before bad things happen. Lauren, you may have other.
I would say exactly that. Our Center on Extremism are truly experts in this space. We have written, of course, we don't want to expose too much of the tactics and mechanisms and channels that are used to further that. But I know that on ADL's website, there were a couple of pieces of coverage earlier this year regarding intel that we did furnish to law enforcement to stop things from happening on the ground in physical spaces. But I think that this gets to, you know, are we stopping individuals? Are we shifting the way that game spaces, the way that social media spaces, the way that lawmakers view and then respond to online harassment? And I think the answer for that is definitely yes. We do, of course, do incident response, talk to individuals all the time and try to mitigate those harms. But we know that it's that balance between individual incident response and shifting a culture or shifting an institutional framework or shifting, you know, a legislative package. And so I think we do a lot of work in that space. And those are the stop it before it starts or fix it so it doesn't get any worse types of questions. Maybe, Daniel, that's a good segue into talking a little bit about Fair Play Alliance involvement, maybe not, but I think that we really are making moves in the gaming world with all of your amazing leadership.
Well, thank you. So I think the idea is to, to not get to the point of reporting, right? And to really work with the game industry. We're working with some folks at the Fair Play Alliance with his coalition of about 160 different game companies that are working to sort of stem and decrease hate and harassment and discrimination in online games. And so we are working with them on, how do we build out game spaces that are attuned to these concerns and really are working towards making sure that from a design perspective, from a community moderation perspective, we're creating really optimal communities to make sure that these things, are mitigated sometimes even before they happen. So I think that's sort of the last question that we have time for at the moment. Lauren and I could and do talk about this all day, but really appreciate your taking the time to listen to us and supporting ADL and this important work. And I'll turn it back over to Sherry and again, thanks to Sherry and my colleagues in Florida for hosting us and for organizing this.
Well, thank you so much, Daniel and Lauren, for this eye-opening conversation. I know that we have some gamers in my household, so I'm always very interested in hearing what you have to say and learning from you. So for all those who were on this really, really interesting Zoom meeting tonight, the seminar, you're going to be receiving a follow-up email with additional resources and a link to the recording of the webinar if you'd like to share it or review it later. The next webinar in our series is going to be held on September 8th at 7:30 p.m. and we will be discussing anti-Semitism and bigotry, how prejudice is expressed by children K through 12. Through 2 case studies, participants will be able to understand how anti-Semitism impacts students and how parents and communities can advocate on behalf of their children. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Thank you again to Lauren and Daniel. Stay well, stay safe. We look forward to seeing you very soon. Bye now.